The pancreas, a 6-inch organ that sits in the back of our abdomen, secretes insulin. After a meal, the amount of sugar in our blood increases significantly. In response to these increased levels of blood sugar, the pancreas secretes the hormone insulin. When we eat, our body breaks down the sugar in that food and delivers it to the bloodstream, where it is later used to fuel our cells. Glucose is the name of the sugar that our cells get energy from. In fact, it is the main power source our cells use for energy. Glucose is unable to enter cells by itself. Glucose needs insulin to be able to be taken up by our cells. Insulin acts as the key, unlocking the cell door, and allows the glucose to enter the cell. So after we eat a meal, our blood sugar rises and insulin is released in response to that. Now this increase of insulin allows the cells to take up glucose so it can be used as energy to power the cell. So how exactly does insulin work? There are 3 main steps in a process called cell signaling. These steps are reception, transduction, and response. In the reception stage of the cell signaling process, a signaling molecule is sent to the target cell, which is received at the receptor protein located on the surface of the cell's membrane. Insulin, the signal molecule in this situation, binds to the insulin receptor on the surface of the cell that wants to use glucose as energy. In the transduction stage, the cell goes through a series of steps that help decode that message that the signal molecule originally demanded. All of the following proteins that become activated will be activated through a process called phosphorylation, which is the transfer of one phosphate group from one protein to another protein. Every time a protein attaches itself to another, it automatically phosphorylates it. This transfer is what activates the proteins.
Throughout the cell signaling chain, proteins attach to and activate each other. This may seem trivial, but these interactions are steps to using glucose as energy. Arguably, one of the most important parts of this cell signaling process is the activation of
protein kinase B, or AKT, which can freely move around the cell. AKT then starts another chain of protein phosphorylation that ultimately results in the creation of glycogen, or stored sugar from glucose. In the response stage, the cell produces a cellular response that was originally demanded by the signal molecule in the beginning of the cell signaling process. PDK1 also activates isoforms of the protein kinase C, or PKC. These main forms are lambda and zeta. The PKC isoforms activate a vesicle called the glucose transporter, or GLUT4. Upon activation, the glucose transporter moves to the surface of the cell and fuses with the membrane, allowing for glucose uptake into the cell and for the glucose to be used as energy. In type 1 diabetes, the patient lacks the insulin used to get glucose from the bloodstream into cells. In this case of diabetes, there is no key to unlock the cell and let the glucose inside. Patients with type 1 diabetes usually have to inject insulin into their bloodstream after meals to lower the amount of sugar in their blood and to get the glucose into their cells to be used as energy. Patients with type 2 diabetes have cells that are resistant to the effects of insulin, which means that it takes more insulin to unlock the cells. The pancreas has to produce significant more amounts of insulin than usual to lower the blood sugar, putting much stress on the pancreas until it eventually stops producing insulin altogether. We do not know for sure what causes diseases like type 1 and type 2 diabetes, but now that we understand how a healthy cell works with insulin, we can understand why certain factors might affect how our cells work in response to insulin. Type 1 diabetics have no insulin, so we can see that the insulin receptor on the cell membrane never becomes activated. Obesity affects the process of cell signaling by releasing free fatty acids into the bloodstream. Free fatty acids inhibit the function of protein kinase C, therefore not allowing the glucose transporter to migrate to the cell membrane to allow for glucose uptake.
Perhaps looking at the metabolic system at a microscopic level can help us understand the big picture of diabetes. By understanding why diabetes occurs, we can reduce the social stigma surrounding this disease and take more educated steps to prevent and treat it in the future.